They cut me off the day I collapsed, and the son I raised with my own blood money told the hospital I was no longer his responsibility. I did not cry when the doctor said the word tumor. I did not panic when the room went quiet. I only felt something heavier settle in my chest. Because in that silence, I already knew who would not be there. I had paid for his school. I had paid for his college. I had paid for his mistakes. I had paid for the life he was living. And when I needed him, he disappeared. Not slowly. Not awkwardly. Completely. No calls. No visits. No questions. The nurse asked if she should contact my next of kin. I gave her his number. She came back 10 minutes later and said, "He said you should handle this yourself." That sentence did more damage than the diagnosis. Because I didn't raise him to be cruel. I raised him to be strong. And somewhere along the way, he learned that strength meant abandoning me. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to machines breathe for me, and I understood something very clearly. I had built a man who did not need me anymore. And I had built him at my own expense. People like to say betrayal hurts the most when it's unexpected. That is not true. It hurts the most when you earned their loyalty, and they still walked away. I remembered the nights I worked double shifts. The weekends I skipped. The vacations I never took. The promotions I delayed. The friends I lost. Also, he could have a future that didn't look like mine. And in the end, he used that future to leave me behind. I didn't call him again. I didn't beg. I didn't argue. I simply listened. And I planned. Because quiet men don't break. They adjust. The next morning, the social worker asked me who would be responsible for my care after discharge. I told her I had no one. She looked at me with pity. I looked at her with truth. I had a son. But I no longer had family. And that is when something inside me changed. Not into anger. Not into hatred. Into clarity. You see, when someone cuts you off, they think the story ends there. They think distance is protection. They think silence is safety. They forget something important. They forgot who paid for their voice. They forgot who taught them to stand. They forgot who knows their weaknesses. And they forgot that the quiet man watching from a distance sees everything. He didn't even come to the house. He didn't check my mail. He didn't ask about my job. He didn't ask about my condition. He just removed me from his life like an inconvenience. I heard through a neighbor that he had moved. New apartment. New girlfriend. New car. All with the degree I paid for. All with the opportunities one opened. He told people I was unstable. That I was dramatic. That I was negative energy. That hurt more than the illness. Because he didn't just leave me. He rewrote me. He made me the villain in the story where I was the foundation. And I stayed silent. Not because I was weak. Because I was watching. Hospitals teach you patience. Illness teaches you timing. And betrayal teaches you precision. I learned quickly who handled his finances. Who co-signed his loans. Who recommended him at work. I learned where his confidence came from. And I learned where it could fall. But I did not move yet. Because revenge without wisdom is noise. And I was done being noise in his life. I had already given him everything once. This time, I would give him space. And space is where people make mistakes. When you think no one is watching, you reveal who you really are. And he revealed plenty. He stopped answering unknown numbers. He blocked my email. He even told relatives I was manipulative. I smiled when I heard that. Because manipulators don't raise independent men. They raise dependent ones. And I had raised him to stand alone. So now he was alone. With no idea that the man he abandoned was still protecting him. Still observing him. Still controlling the foundation beneath his feet. People think revenge is loud. It isn't. It is quiet. It is slow. It is invisible until it is too late. And mine had already begun. Not with confrontation. Not with drama. Not with tears. With paperwork. Because paperwork is where power hides. I changed nothing immediately. I only reviewed. I only observed. I only listened. I had time now. Illness gives you time. And silence gives you access. He never noticed. He never checked. He never asked. He was too busy being free. Free from me. Free from responsibility. Free from gratitude. And that freedom would cost him more than he ever imagined. Because the man he abandoned was the man holding his life together. And he had no idea. I lay in that hospital bed, tubes in my arms, weakness in my body, and control in my hands. He thought I was finished. I was just beginning. The strange thing about being discarded is how invisible you become. Not in the world. In their world. He walked past my existence like it was old furniture. I watched from a distance. Not physically. Through records. Through people. Through patterns. You learn to read patterns when you've lived long enough. He changed jobs quickly. He chased titles. He chased attention. He chased validation. That told me something important. He wasn't confident. He was hungry. And hungry people cut corners. I paid attention to who he impressed, who he depended on, who he avoided. And I saw it clearly. He was standing on ground he didn't understand. He had no idea how much of his stability came from structures I built quietly behind him. Credit lines, references, professional favors, legal cushions, all things he never asked about. All things he assumed were permanent. People mistake permanence for entitlement. They think because something has always been there, it always will be. They forget that someone placed it there. I didn't rush. I didn't threaten. I didn't reach out. I let life continue. Because life always exposes arrogance. He started taking risks. He started speaking poorly about his past. He started distancing himself from people who knew where he came from. That's always the sign. When someone rewrites their origin, they are ashamed of it. And when someone is ashamed of their origin, they will eventually disrespect it. Which he already had. I heard through mutual connections that he called me toxic. That he said I was controlling. That he claimed I held him back. That was almost funny. I had never stopped him from anything. I had only paid for everything. And he mistook support for restriction. That is the kind of thinking that collapses on itself. I stayed quiet. Silence is uncomfortable for liars. They need reaction. They need resistance. They need conflict. I gave him none. I let him believe he was untouchable. Because the higher someone stands without humility, the harder the fall feels. My doctor asked me if I had family support. I said no. He nodded like he had heard that before. Because he had. I wasn't the first parent abandoned by the child they sacrificed for. And I wouldn't be the last. But I would be the one who handled it differently. I didn't seek sympathy. I sought accuracy. I reviewed every document. Every agreement. Every signature. You'd be surprised how much power you still hold when you stop explaining yourself. He had built his life assuming I was weak. And weak people are predictable. I was not weak. I was quiet. And there is a difference. He thought my silence meant acceptance. It meant calculation. He thought my illness meant defeat. It meant clarity. Because when your body slows down, your mind speeds up. And mine was sharp. He had no idea I was still protecting him. Still keeping his name clean. Still closing doors before they became problems. Because old habits die hard. But that would change. Not with anger. With precision. The man he had become would meet the world without my shadow. And the world is not gentle. I didn't wish him harm. I wished him reality. Because reality is the only teacher arrogance respects. He had forgotten where he came from. Soon, he would remember. There is a moment in every man's life when he realizes he has been taken for granted. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is quiet. And it changes everything. Mine came when I saw his name listed as emergency contact on a form I was filling. And I hesitated. I didn't erase it. I stared at it. And I understood. He was no longer my emergency. He was my lesson. People talk about unconditional love like it is noble. It is not. It is dangerous. Because it teaches people that no matter what they do, they will be held. And when people believe they will always be held, they stop respecting the hands that hold them. I had held him for decades. He dropped me in a day. So I adjusted. Not my heart. My position. I removed him quietly. From systems. From access. From privileges he didn't even know existed. Not to hurt him. To balance him. He had lived too long without consequences. And consequences are not punishment. They are education. I didn't block him. I didn't confront him. I let him continue believing he was independent. Because nothing humbles a man faster than discovering how dependent he really was. I was calm. I was steady. I was invisible. And that is the most dangerous position a man like me can hold. He thought I was gone. I was everywhere. Watching. Waiting. Learning. And when the time came, he would learn who he disowned. Not through words. Through life. The first thing people misunderstand about sacrifice is that it looks simple from the outside. They think you just work hard, provide, and go home. They do not see what you trade. They do not see what you give up. They do not see what you bury. I met his mother when he was still small enough to believe adults were honest. She had already lived hard. She had already been disappointed. And she was tired in a way that does not go away. I was not looking to be a hero. I was looking for peace. He was quiet when I first met him. Watchful. Careful. The kind of boy who learned early not to expect much. That should have warned me. But I saw potential. And I have always believed potential deserves protection. I didn't try to replace anyone. I didn't force authority. I just stayed. I stayed when things were uncomfortable. I stayed when he pushed back. I stayed when he tested limits. And slowly, he leaned. Not emotionally. Practically. He let me handle things. School forms. Transportation. Money. I became the structure. And structures are invisible when they work. Years passed like that. Quietly. Predictably. He grew taller. More confident. More distant. That is normal. Young men need space. They need friction. They need to feel separate. I respected that. I never checked his phone. Never tracked his location. Never questioned his friends. I believed in trust. And trust is easy when things are going well. I worked in a place that rewarded loyalty. Not loudly. But consistently. Promotions came. Raises came. Responsibilities grew. And every step forward, I placed behind him. Better schools. Better tutors. Better chances. I never told him how many nights I slept in my office. I never told him how many weekends I canceled. I never told him how many opportunities one turned down. Because real support is silent. When his mother passed, he was already grown. Old enough to understand loss. Young enough to avoid it. He didn't grieve loudly. He withdrew. That's when I noticed the shift. He stopped asking questions. Stopped sharing details. Stopped seeking advice. Not because he didn't need it. Because he didn't want to need it. Independence can be healthy. It can also be defensive. I gave him space. Not distance. I stayed available. I always stayed available. And he used that. Not consciously. Not maliciously. But consistently. He leaned when it was convenient. disappeared when it wasn't. And I allowed it. Because I believed time would balance it. Time always balances things. I just didn't know in which direction. He chose a field that looked impressive, sounded important, paid well. I supported it. Not because I understood it. Because I trusted his judgment. I connected him with people. People who didn't owe me anything. People who did favors because of respect. He never asked how. He never asked why. Things just worked. That is dangerous. When things always work, you stop appreciating the reason. He moved out. Got his own place. Started building his own life. I was proud. Quietly. He didn't call much. But he answered. That was enough. Until it wasn't. The first sign was small. He missed a dinner. No explanation. No apology. Then another. Then another. He stopped asking about my day. Stopped asking about my health. Not out of cruelty. Out of comfort. He was comfortable not checking. That is how detachment begins. Slow. Polite. Invisible. And then one day it is complete. I didn't confront him. I didn't complain. I let it be. Because I thought it was a phase. Everything is a phase until it isn't. When I got sick, I didn't tell him immediately. Not because I was hiding. Because I didn't want to worry him. That was my mistake. Because when I finally did tell him, he reacted like a stranger. Polite. Distant. Uninvolved. He said he was busy. He said he had deadlines. He said he would check in. He didn't. And that is when I understood. He had already left. Just not officially. People leave emotionally long before they leave physically. By the time they walk away, they are already gone. I had missed that moment. Or maybe I ignored it. Either way, I was alone before I knew it. And that is the setup most betrayals use. Comfort. Assumption. Silence. No arguments. No fights. Just absence. And absence is the loudest answer. The hospital was not new to me. I had been there before for work-related health checks. But this time was different. This time, I was a patient. And being a patient teaches you humility. It also teaches you who shows up. Friends came. Colleagues called. Neighbors checked in. He didn't. Not once. No message. No visit. No excuse. And still, I defended him. I told myself he was young. Busy. Under pressure. We lie to ourselves to protect our pride. Because admitting you raised someone who doesn't care is harder than being sick. When the nurse asked about family, I said his name. When the social worker called him, he declined. Not harshly. Not angrily. Professionally. That was the part that stayed with me. He didn't reject me emotionally. He rejected me administratively. Like a task. Like a problem. Like an inconvenience. And that told me everything. He had become efficient at not needing me. And I had been efficient at making that possible. That is the quiet tragedy of support. You make yourself unnecessary. And one day, they realize it. And they don't look back. That night, in that bed, I didn't feel anger. I felt awareness. Awareness is heavier than anger. Because anger burns. Awareness settles. And once something settles, it doesn't move. I began to see the pattern. Not just with him. With myself. I had always been the one who adjusted. The one who adapted. The one who filled gaps. I had taught him that gaps fill themselves. So he stopped noticing them. And now, I was the gap. And he let it stay empty. I didn't blame him. That surprises people. But blame requires expectation. And I had finally let go of expectation. Instead, I observed. And observation is where power returns. I noticed how quickly he trusted new people. How easily he dismissed old ones. How confidently he spoke about independence. Confidence without foundation is dangerous, because it collapses under pressure. And pressure was coming. Not because I would cause it, because life always does. He had no idea I was watching. No idea I was learning. No idea that the man he stopped respecting was still quietly holding pieces of his life together. And soon, very soon, he would feel the difference. He used to ask for advice about everything. Careers, money, relationships. Then he stopped. That was not growth. That was dismissal. Growth still checks in. Dismissal does not. He started making decisions without context. Moves without preparation. Commitments without support. He didn't fail. Not yet. Which only fed his confidence. Success without struggle is a dangerous teacher. It convinces you that you are the reason things work. He forgot the groundwork. He forgot the network. He forgot the quiet protection behind him. I watched him change his circle. New friends. New influences. People who didn't know his past. People who only saw his present. That is seductive. When no one knows where you came from, you get to pretend you arrived alone. And he enjoyed that. He enjoyed being the self-made man. Even though he wasn't. He didn't lie about it. He just didn't mention it. Omission is the cleanest form of dishonesty. He talked about ambition. About hustle. About independence. He never talked about support. Because support doesn't sound impressive. It sounds weak. And he wanted to sound strong. So he erased me from his narrative. And people let him. Because people believe what benefits them. I heard it from someone who worked with him. He never talks about his family. Acts like he did it all himself. I smiled when I heard that. Because self-made men are the most fragile. They think they have no roots. And roots are what keep you standing. He was cutting his. Without knowing it. The workplace he entered was competitive. Political. Fast-moving. Not cruel. Just sharp. It rewarded confidence. It punished hesitation. He did well at first. He was charming. Intelligent. Eager. People like that. They also test people like that. And I knew that. Because I had been there. I had survived it. I had navigated it. I had protected him from it. Quietly. Without him ever noticing. When a project failed, someone took the blame for him. When a mistake was made, it was softened. When a conflict arose, it was redirected. Not by magic. By me. Through calls. Through favors. Through influence. He never asked. He never knew. That is how real protection works. It never announces itself. And because it never announced itself, he believed he didn't need it. That is the irony. When I became sick, I stopped intervening. Not intentionally. Physically. I couldn't. And things started shifting. Small things at first. Delays. Miscommunications. Tension. He didn't connect it. He blamed others. He blamed systems. He blamed bad luck. He never blamed himself. Because he had never had to. I heard he was getting impatient. Frustrated. Short-tempered. That told me he was meeting resistance. And resistance is where character shows. Does it adapt? Or does it break? I was curious. Not hopeful. Not anxious. Curious. He called once. Briefly. Not to ask about me. To ask a question. A technical question. A work question. He needed something. I answered. Because I am not petty. But I noted it. Because people reveal priorities in crisis. And his priority was still himself. That is not evil. It is immature. And immaturity has a cost. I did not lecture him. I did not warn him. I let life continue. Because life is the best teacher. And I had become patient. Very patient. He started dating someone new. Someone ambitious. Someone loud. She liked status. She liked image. She liked men who looked powerful. And he liked being seen as powerful. They were a perfect match. Two people pretending to be more than they were. I didn't interfere. Love doesn't need help destroying itself. I stayed quiet. Because the quiet phase is where everything is set. People think the story is in the explosion. It's not. It's in the silence before it. The longer you live, the more you understand that distance is not created by miles. It is created by decisions. He made many. And each one moved him further from me. Not emotionally. Strategically. He stopped listing me on forms. Stopped mentioning me in conversations. Stopped including me in plans. That is how people erase you. Not with cruelty. With convenience. I watched him build a life that did not include me. And I let him. Because inclusion forced is not inclusion. And I was done forcing anything. He moved again. Bigger place. Better area. I did not visit. He did not invite. And the space between us became normal. That is the most dangerous stage. When absence feels natural. I received a letter one day. Formal. Cold. It was about a change in legal structure. He had removed me from something we shared. Not maliciously. Administratively. That word again. Administratively. Like I was a file. A line item. A liability. I didn't react. I read it. Twice. And I understood. He was separating. Not emotionally. Legally. That takes intention. That takes planning. That takes a decision. And he had made it. Without a conversation. Without a warning. Without a word. I sat with that. Not angrily. Thoughtfully. Because that was not ignorance. That was choice. And choices have consequences. Even quiet ones. I thought about all the times I had chosen him. Over comfort. Over rest. Over myself. And I compared them to this. This clean, polite removal. And I smiled. Not because it didn't hurt. Because it clarified. He was not confused. He was done. And when someone is done with you, the most powerful thing you can do is let them be done. Completely. I didn't call him. I didn't ask why. I adjusted my records. My documents. My plans. Not out of spite. Out of alignment. If he no longer considered me part of his life, I would no longer position myself as part of his safety. That is not revenge. That is respect. Respect for his decision. People misunderstand boundaries. They think they are walls. They are not. They are mirrors. They show people where you end. And I had ended for him. So I respected that. Fully. He thought he had cut ties. He had no idea how many ties were still connected. He had no idea how many things flowed through me. Because he never asked. And soon he would find out. Not because I would tell him. Because life would. And through it all, I stayed calm. Because calm is the position of control. And control was returning to me. Slowly. Quietly. Naturally. The first crack showed up in his voice. Not panic. Not fear. Irritation. He called late one evening, not to ask how I was, not to check in, but to complain. About people. About politics. About obstacles. He spoke like the world had suddenly become unfair. I listened. Not as a father. As a man. And I heard something new. Blame. He said his team wasn't supportive. He said management was short-sighted. He said he was being held back. I smiled to myself. Because that is always the first stage. When people stop winning, they look for enemies. And he had always been protected from enemies. He had no idea. He told me someone else got a project he expected. Someone with less experience. someone with less skill. He said it wasn't right. I agreed. Not because it wasn't right. Because he needed validation. And validation keeps people talking. So I listened. He said the company was changing. That the culture was shifting. That loyalty didn't mean what it used to. I let him speak. Because people reveal their weaknesses when they complain. And he revealed his. He needed recognition. He needed authority. He needed to feel important. That is dangerous in competitive spaces. Because importance is something others decide. Not you. He didn't know I already knew what was happening. I had friends there. Not spies. Not informants. Colleagues. And they talked. Not about him. About the environment. And the environment was tightening. Budgets. Oversight. Accountability. All the soft cushions were being removed. And I had been one of those cushions. Without him knowing. I had softened edges. I had redirected blame. I had absorbed impact. Not anymore. Not because I was cruel. Because I was absent. And absence is powerful. He started missing small things. Deadlines. Details. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to be noticed. And when you're noticed for the wrong reasons, you're watched. And when you're watched, mistakes grow. He called again. More irritated. Less confident. He said people were questioning his decisions. He said someone had undermined him in a meeting. I asked calmly, "Why do you think that is?" He paused. Then blamed politics. That told me everything. He was not self-reflecting. He was self-defending. That is how men lose ground. I did not advise him. I did not warn him. Because he was no longer seeking guidance. He was seeking agreement. And I do not lie. So I listened. And I waited. The first real humiliation came quietly. Not publicly. Privately. He lost access to something he assumed was permanent. A system. A privilege. A pipeline. He didn't understand why. He asked around. No clear answers. Just policy changes. That is the beauty of systems. They don't argue. They just apply. And he had never had to deal with that. Because I always handled it. He started getting defensive. Short with people. Impatient in meetings. That never helps. Confidence looks like strength. Defensiveness looks like weakness. And weakness attracts pressure. I heard from someone that he had been corrected in front of others. Not harshly. Professionally. But for him, it was a shock. He was not used to being questioned. And it showed. He didn't take it well. He laughed it off. But people noticed. People always notice. His girlfriend began pushing. For more. For faster. For better. She liked progress. She liked image. And progress had slowed. That creates tension. Tension exposes character. He called again. This time, there was an edge. He asked if I knew anyone. Anyone who could help. I said no. Not because I didn't. Because he had already removed me from his life. And I was respecting that. He hesitated. Then thanked me. That hesitation was heavy. Because he was realizing something. Not consciously. Instinctively. Something was missing. And he couldn't name it. I did not enjoy that. Let me be clear. This was not satisfaction. This was observation. I was not celebrating. I was learning. Because I wanted to understand who he had become. Not who I thought he was. The pressure continued. Small losses. Small embarrassments. Small setbacks. They add up. They always do. And the more they add up, the more people look for support. He had none. Not the kind that mattered. He began arriving early and leaving late. That is always a sign. When effort increases but results don't, people compensate with time. Time does not fix strategy. It only delays exposure. He took on more, spoke more, pushed harder, and in doing so, he made more enemies. Because pressure without diplomacy creates resistance. He didn't see that. He thought he was being strong. Strength without awareness is aggression. And aggression invites challenge. He lost a recommendation. Not loudly. Quietly. Someone he expected to support him didn't. That stung. He didn't say it. But I heard it. Because people talk. And when they talk, patterns form. And his pattern was changing. From promising to problematic. That is a dangerous shift. Because reputation is fragile. And his was built on assumption, not resilience. He was called into a meeting. Not disciplinary. Exploratory. Those are worse. Because they ask questions. And questions mean doubt. He left that meeting unsettled. I could hear it when he called. He tried to sound confident. But his words were sharp. Rushed. Uneven. I asked how things were going. He said, "Fine." That's when I knew they weren't. Because confident men explain. Uncertain men deflect. He mentioned restructuring. That word again. He said the company was realigning priorities. That is code. Code for removal. Code for reduction. Code for evaluation. And he was being evaluated. For the first time. Honestly. Without my shadow. He asked if I was okay. Briefly. Out of obligation. I said yes. Because my condition was not his concern anymore. He had made that clear. And I was not going to use it. That would be manipulation. And I do not manipulate. I position. He told me he was thinking of moving again. A new opportunity. A better place. That is what people say when they feel unstable. They seek change instead of stability. Because change feels like control. Even when it isn't. I stayed calm. Because calm disarms. And I was done being emotional in a space where emotion had no value. The first public misstep came in a meeting. He spoke too strongly. Challenged someone above him. Not aggressively. Confidently. But confidence without alignment is disrespect. And it was received that way. He didn't notice the shift in the room. He didn't read the faces. He didn't feel the temperature. Because he had never needed to. I had always managed the climate. And now he was exposed. After that, he wasn't included. Not deliberately. Naturally. People stopped looping him in. Stopped seeking his input. That is how exclusion begins. Not with rejection. With omission. And omission hurts more. He grew frustrated. His girlfriend noticed. She pushed harder. Because she didn't want to be associated with stagnation. That created tension at home. Tension at work. And tension follows you. You can't leave it behind. He snapped at someone. Nothing dramatic. Just sharp. And sharpness creates distance. Distance creates isolation. And isolation makes mistakes louder. He called me. Late. He said, "Do you think I made a mistake?" That was the first honest question he had asked in a long time. And I respected it. So I answered. I said, "Sometimes." That was it. Not advice. Not lecture. Just truth. And truth unsettles. He didn't push. He ended the call. And I knew he was thinking. But thinking does not fix patterns. Only awareness does. And he was not aware yet. The warning signs multiplied. He missed a detail. Then another. He misread a situation. Then another. Nothing catastrophic. But consistent. And consistency is what people notice. Not mistakes. Patterns. He was becoming a pattern. A pattern of friction. A pattern of resistance. A pattern of complication. That is dangerous in any system. Because systems remove friction. Quietly. Efficiently. He lost a small responsibility. Reassigned. No announcement. No explanation. Just change. He didn't notice at first. Then he did. And he didn't like it. Because power, once felt, is addictive. And losing it feels personal. Even when it isn't. He complained more. About politics. About favoritism. About unfairness. Those are the words of someone losing control. Not someone gaining it. I listened. Because I wanted to hear where his mind was. And his mind was external. He blamed outward. Never inward. That is the most dangerous position. Because you cannot correct what you do not acknowledge. His girlfriend began questioning. About money. About stability. About plans. And he had fewer answers. That creates pressure. Pressure at home becomes pressure at work. And pressure at work becomes mistakes. He made one. A visible one. Not huge. But public. And public mistakes change perception. They do not destroy it. They stain it. And stains linger. He was spoken to. Privately. Professionally. Firmly. He told me later. He tried to laugh it off. But I heard the insecurity. Because when confidence is real, it does not need humor. He was no longer in control. He just didn't know it yet. And that is the most vulnerable stage. When you believe you are still steering. But you are not. He tried to assert authority. It failed. He tried to influence. It didn't land. He tried to push. He was resisted. And resistance surprised him. Because he had never faced it. Not like this. He began looking around. For support. For allies. For backup. He didn't find much. Because alliances are built over time. And he had spent time distancing. Not building. He called me again. More openly this time. He asked if I knew what was going on. I said, yes. He paused. Then asked, why didn't you tell me? I said, you didn't ask. That landed. Because it was true. And truth always lands. He was quiet after that. Not angry. Thinking. And thinking is dangerous. Because thinking leads to realization. And realization leads to regret. He was being tested. Not by me. By life. And life is not gentle. Life does not care about your intentions. It only responds to your patterns. And his pattern was catching up to him. He did not know it yet. But the ground beneath him was shifting. Slowly. Quietly. Irreversibly. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. Because the man who used to stabilize it was no longer standing there. He had walked away. By his own choice. He didn't see the collapse coming. Most people don't. Because collapses are not sudden. They are cumulative. Small shifts. Small losses. Small silences. Until one day, the silence is loud. He called in the middle of the day. That was new. His voice was controlled. Too controlled. That is always a sign. He said they were restructuring. He said his role was being reviewed. He said it was nothing serious. People only say that when it is serious. I listened. He asked if I had heard anything. I said no. Not because I hadn't. Because he had chosen a life without me in it. And I was respecting that boundary. He paused. Then asked, do you think I should be worried? I didn't answer immediately. Silence is powerful. Then I said, if you're asking, you already are. He laughed. Too quickly. And changed the subject. But something had shifted. I could feel it. The confidence was thinning. The review turned into a meeting. The meeting turned into a second meeting. The second meeting turned into a warning. Not official. Verbal. Professional. But firm. And he did not take it well. Because he had never been warned before. He had been guided. protected, redirected, but never warned. And warnings feel personal, even when they aren't. He started staying late again. But now, it wasn't ambition. It was fear. Fear looks like effort, but it is different. It is frantic. It is scattered. It is loud in quiet ways. And people notice. His girlfriend noticed too. She started questioning more, pushing more, because instability is unattractive. And she had not signed up for uncertainty. They argued, not loudly, tightly, and tension followed him everywhere. Work, home, calls. It showed. He made another mistake. This one couldn't be softened, because no one was there to soften it. Not anymore. He was corrected publicly, not humiliated, but exposed. And exposure changes how people see you, even when it's fair. After that, the tone changed. People spoke differently to him. Shorter, colder, more formal. Respect had shifted, and respect is difficult to regain once it moves. He called me that night, not to complain, to ask, "Can I come by?" That was new, because he hadn't come by in a long time. I said yes, not because I missed him, because I was curious. He arrived tense, not angry, not emotional, tense. He sat. He didn't look around. He didn't comment on anything. He went straight to the point. He said things weren't going well. He said he felt targeted. He said he didn't understand the change. I listened, and I saw it. The boy who used to lean on me was gone. This was a man who didn't know where to stand, and that is dangerous. He asked for advice, not guidance. Advice. That told me something. He didn't want support. He wanted solutions. Because solutions are faster. And faster is what panicked people want. I asked him questions. About his decisions. About his approach. About his relationships. He answered defensively. That told me more than his words. I didn't criticize. I didn't correct. I simply listened. Because sometimes the turning point is not action. It is awareness. And awareness was beginning. He asked if I could help. Not directly. Indirectly. He said, "You know people." I smiled. Because that was the first time in a long time he acknowledged that. I said, "You didn't seem to need me before." Not harshly. Not bitterly. Calmly. He didn't respond. And that silence was heavy, because it carried regret. He left unsettled, not angry, thinking. And thinking is where change begins. But change is not immediate. It is uncomfortable. And discomfort is not something he was used to. I did not reach out after that, because this was his moment, not mine. And moments like that should not be interrupted. The next week, things escalated. He was removed from a project. Not officially. Just reassigned. And that hurt. Because projects are status. And status is identity. And identity was slipping. He tried to assert himself. It backfired. He tried to challenge. He was shut down. Not aggressively. Procedurally. And procedure is cold. He came home angry. His girlfriend confronted him. They argued. This time louder. And loud arguments leave marks. Not visible ones. Reputational ones. Neighbors hear. People notice. And perception shifts. He was unraveling. Not dramatically. Internally. And internal unraveling is the most dangerous. Because it is invisible until it is not. He began arriving at work with a different posture. Shoulders tight. Jaw set. That is not confidence. That is defense. And defense attracts pressure. People sense it. They don't always know why. But they feel it. And they respond. He was questioned again. This time about decisions. About leadership. About tone. That stung. Because tone is personal. When people question your tone, they are questioning you. And he took it that way. He started isolating. Eating alone. Leaving quickly. That is never good. Because isolation breeds narrative. And narrative becomes assumption. He heard rumors. About replacement. About downsizing. He didn't know what to believe. Uncertainty makes people reckless. And he became reckless. He spoke out of turn. He challenged someone above him again. Not disrespectfully. Confidently. But confidence without leverage is foolish. And he had lost his leverage. He was called into another meeting. This time, there was documentation. That is the line. When documentation appears, the story has already been written. People just haven't told you yet. He came to me again. Unannounced. He looked tired. Not physically. Mentally. He asked if he could stay a while. That was new. Because independence had been important to him. Now, distance felt unsafe. I said yes. Because I am not cruel. I am precise. He spoke. Not complained. Spoke. About pressure. About expectations. About not feeling supported. And I listened. Because this was not performance. This was honesty. And honesty deserves space. He admitted he felt like things were slipping. He admitted he didn't know why. He admitted he was scared. That was the first real thing he had said in a long time. And I respected it. I didn't reassure him. I didn't comfort him. I asked him questions. About how he treated people. About how he reacted under pressure. About how he handled conflict. He became quiet. Because the answers were uncomfortable. He asked, "Do you think this is my fault?" That was important. Because accountability is the doorway. I said, "Partly." Not harshly. Not gently. Truthfully. He nodded. Because he knew. He stayed the night. In the guest room. And that alone told me everything. Because men do not return to places they do not value. And he had returned. Not because he needed shelter. Because he needed grounding. The next day, he left early. Quiet. Focused. He was trying. I could see that. But effort cannot erase patterns. Only consistency can. And consistency takes time. Time he did not have. At work, the pressure increased. He was monitored. Not obviously. Subtly. And subtle monitoring is worse. Because you feel it but can't prove it. He lost another responsibility. Then another. And each loss chipped away at his confidence. Not his ego. His confidence. Because ego hides. Confidence sustains. And he was losing sustain. His girlfriend began pulling away. Not dramatically. Distanced. Less communication. More space. Because people retreat from instability. And she was no exception. He noticed. He became anxious. And anxiety makes people cling. And clinging pushes people away. He was unraveling. And I was watching. Not with pleasure. With clarity. Because this was the turning point. The moment where he would either grow. Or fall. The call came on a Friday. Late. His voice was different. Not tense. Empty. He said, "They let me go." Not fired. Not terminated. Let go. That language matters. Because it makes you feel replaceable. He was quiet after that. Waiting. For something. I didn't speak. Because there was nothing to say. He explained. Restructuring. Realignment. Position eliminated. All the clean words. All the soft words. For the same thing. He was out. He asked what he should do. That was the first time he had asked that in years. Not for advice. For direction. And direction is something you only ask for when you feel lost. I said, you should sit with it. He didn't like that. Because people want solutions. Not reflection. But reflection is where growth happens. He came over. Again. This time, he didn't pretend. He looked broken. Not emotionally. Structurally. His identity had been built around that role. And now it was gone. And he didn't know who he was without it. That is a dangerous place. Because people rebuild quickly. Or poorly. He said he felt betrayed. By the company. By the system. By people. He did not say by himself. That was telling. I listened. Then I said, do you remember when you told the hospital I wasn't your responsibility? He froze. Because he had forgotten. But I had not. Not with anger. With memory. He looked away. And that was enough. Because shame is louder than apology. He said, I didn't mean it like that. I said, but you said it like that. Calmly. Not accusing. Accurate. He didn't defend himself. He didn't argue. He just sat. And that silence was heavy. Because it was full of realization. He said, I didn't think you needed me. I said, and I didn't think you needed me. That landed. Because it mirrored. And mirrors are powerful. He apologized. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. Simply. And I accepted it. Not because I had to. Because I had already moved past it. He asked if I could help him. Not with connections. With stability. He said, I need to reset. That was good. Because reset is healthier than revenge. I told him he could stay as long as he needed. Because I am not his enemy. I am his foundation. Even if he forgot it. But something had changed. I was no longer protecting him. I was no longer buffering him. I was no longer intervening. He was going to face life. Fully. And that was the lesson. Not punishment. Reality. He would rebuild. But this time, he would understand the cost. He slept most of that first day. Not from exhaustion. From collapse. When your identity falls apart, your body follows. I let him rest. Because recovery does not start with lectures. It starts with stillness. When he woke, he looked smaller. Not physically. Internally. He moved slower. Spoke less. That was good. Because silence is where people rebuild. He asked if he could use my desk. To update his resume. That was new. He had never needed help with that before. Not because he was incapable. Because I had always handled positioning. Quietly. Without him knowing. Now he was exposed. And exposure humbles. I did not take over. I did not correct. I watched. Because watching tells you where someone is. And he was uncertain. Not arrogant. Not defensive. Uncertain. That is progress. He applied to places. Good places. Competitive places. And the responses were slow. Not non-existent. But slow. That bothered him. Because he was used to immediate traction. Immediate interest. Immediate momentum. He didn't say it. But I could feel it. He asked if this was normal. I said, now it is. And that was the truth. Because normal is relative. And his normal had been protected. He met people. Interviews. Conversations. Coffee meetings. And he came back thoughtful. Not confident. Thoughtful. That is the difference. Confidence speaks. Thoughtfulness listens. And he was listening. He told me one interviewer questioned his leadership style. He was surprised. Because no one had ever done that before. I said, they're supposed to. Not sharply. Calmly. He nodded. Because he was beginning to understand. His girlfriend visited once. It was awkward. Polite. Brief. And then she stopped. He didn't mention it. But I noticed. Because detachment has a sound. It is quiet. And their relationship was becoming quiet. He didn't chase her. That was good. Because chasing during collapse creates dependency. And dependency is not strength. He focused on himself. On rebuilding. On recalibrating. And that was new. He asked me about my health. Not out of obligation. Out of concern. That was also new. Because concern has weight. It costs something. And he was paying attention now. I told him I was stable. Not improving. Not declining. Stable. He nodded. And stayed. And that mattered. Because presence is the first form of respect. He began helping around the house. Not dramatically. Naturally. Dishes. Repairs. Errands. He didn't announce it. He just did it. That told me something. Because people do not act without reason. And his reason was guilt. But guilt is not bad. It is awareness's first step. He found a job. Not prestigious. Not glamorous. Functional. And he hesitated. Because it felt like a step down. I said nothing. Because pride has to be dealt with privately. He accepted it. That was important. Because acceptance is the doorway to humility. And humility is the foundation of growth. He worked. Quietly. Without complaining. Without posturing. And he came home tired. Not from stress. From effort. That was good. Because effort builds. He began listening more. Talking less. Asking questions. Not to challenge. To understand. That was the shift. He came home one evening and said, "I didn't realize how much you handled." Not as an apology. As a realization. And realization is more valuable than apology. Because apologies end. Realizations change. He said the systems were different. The expectations clearer. The support thinner. He said, "You have to earn everything." I said, "Yes." And that was all. Because the lesson had landed. He struggled. Not dramatically. Quietly. And quiet struggle is the most honest. Because it is not for performance. It is for survival. He made mistakes. Owned them. That was new. He didn't deflect. Didn't explain. He corrected. And that is growth. He spoke differently about people. Less judgment. More observation. He had been humbled. Not by me. By life. And life's humility is durable. He called his old colleagues. Some didn't respond. That surprised him. Because he had assumed loyalty. I said nothing. Because that is something you have to feel. Not be told. He rebuilt his routine. Not around status. Around stability. And that was good. Because stability outlasts status. He stopped complaining. Not because things were perfect. Because he was adjusting. And adjustment is the mark of maturity. His girlfriend officially ended it. Not dramatically. Cleanly. He took it quietly. That surprised me. Because he didn't blame. He didn't rage. He didn't defend. He just nodded. And that told me he was changing. Because old him would have argued. He said, "I think I lost myself." I said, "You found yourself." And that was true. Because sometimes you have to lose who you pretend to be. To meet who you really are. He asked about my story. About my choices. About my sacrifices. He had never done that before. And that mattered. Because curiosity is respect. I told him. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. Factually. About nights. About weekends. About decisions. And he listened. Not defensively. Gratefully. And that was the difference. He apologized again. Not for the hospital. For everything. For distance. for dismissal, for assumption. And I accepted it. Not because I needed closure, because he needed permission to grow. He began introducing me differently. To people. Not as an obligation. As a presence. And that told me something. Because people show value in language. He was rebuilding. Not upward. Inward. And that is the only kind that lasts. The change was subtle. But consistent. He woke earlier. Prepared more. Planned better. Not to impress. To stabilize. And stability is quiet. He took responsibility at work. Even when it wasn't his. Not to be a hero. To be reliable. And reliability is currency. People noticed. Not loudly. Gradually. And opportunity began to return. Not handed. Earned. He came home one day and said, "They trust me." Not bragging. Surprised. Because trust had to be rebuilt. And he was feeling it. He asked for feedback. Not validation. That is a big difference. Because validation feeds ego. Feedback feeds growth. He spoke about long-term plans. Not grand ones. Practical ones. And that told me he was thinking sustainably. Not impressively. He checked on me. Regularly. Not performatively. Naturally. That was important. Because concern should not be scheduled. It should be instinctive. He handled things. Bills. Appointments. Logistics. Without being asked. And that told me everything. Because responsibility, when chosen, is real. He said, "I didn't know how alone you were." I said, "I didn't know how unaware you were." And we both smiled. Because truth had replaced tension. He didn't ask for forgiveness again. Because he no longer needed it. He had changed. And change is the only apology that matters. He had been broken. Not crushed. Reshaped. And reshaping is painful. But necessary. I watched him. Not with pride. With peace. Because peace is what comes when things align. And things were aligning. Not perfectly. Honestly. There is a quiet that comes after storms. Not the empty kind. The settled kind. He had rebuilt enough that the panic was gone. The urgency had softened. The edges had smoothed. And that is when real change shows. Not when someone is desperate. When they are steady. He didn't rush anymore. Didn't posture. Didn't perform. He just lived. And that was new. Because he had always been trying to prove something. Now, he was just becoming something. We ate together more. Not ceremonially. Casually. And that matters. Because forced closeness is uncomfortable. Natural closeness is quiet. He spoke about work with balance. Not complaint. Not pride. Balance. He could see his role. His limits. His growth. And that told me he was grounded. He checked in about my health. Not anxiously. Consistently. And consistency is the language of care. I didn't need him to apologize again. I didn't need him to explain. I needed him to stay. And he did. We spoke about the past once. Not emotionally. Practically. He asked why I never said anything. Why I never confronted him. Why I never demanded. I said, because men don't grow from pressure. They grow from consequence. And he understood. Because he had lived it. He said, "You let me fall." I said, "You jumped." Not harshly. Accurately. And accuracy is respect. He nodded. Because he knew. And that was enough. We didn't discuss revenge. Because there was none. Just reality. And reality had done the work. Better than I ever could. He began mentoring someone at work. Not officially. Quietly. And that mattered. Because people who have learned usually teach. He came home one day and said, "I see it now." I asked. See what? He said, how easy it is to forget who helped you. That was the lesson. And it had landed. He did not say thank you dramatically. He showed it. And showing is always better. He planned things. Not for himself. For us. Appointments. Errands. Meals. Not because he had to. Because he wanted to. And that is the difference. I felt lighter. Not because my health had improved. Because my heart had. And that is real healing. We didn't need to talk about the betrayal anymore. It had passed. Not because it was forgotten. Because it was understood. Time moved differently after that. Not slower. Clearer. When things are aligned, you stop noticing the clock. Because you are not waiting for anything. He found stability. Not spectacular success. Stability. And that mattered more. Because stability is sustainable. He moved into his own place again. Not far. Close enough. That was intentional. And I respected it. Because proximity is a choice. And he chose it. He didn't drift this time. He stayed connected. Not out of obligation. Out of awareness. And awareness lasts. He brought people by. Friends. Colleagues. And he introduced me with respect. Not pride. Respect. And that was everything. He didn't hide his past anymore. He owned it. And owning your past is power. Because no one can use it against you. He spoke about his mistakes openly. Not dramatically. Honestly. And that is how shame leaves. Through truth. I watched him. Not as a father. As a man. And I saw growth. Not performance. Not image. Growth. And that was enough. One evening he said, I was afraid you wouldn't forgive me. I said, I wasn't angry. He didn't understand. So I explained. Anger needs energy. I had clarity. And clarity is quieter. He smiled. Because he was beginning to understand me. Not as a provider. As a person. And that matters. He asked what I wanted. Not what I needed. What I wanted. And that is respect. Because needs are obligations. Wants are invitations. I said, peace. And I meant it. Because peace is not absence of conflict. It is absence of tension. And the tension was gone. He gave it. Not with words. With presence.